Hello, I'm Sally Bond, and I head up the grant writing arm for the Office of Research and Partnership at Purdue. And I work with a team of grant writers, and we oversee the proposal development process for faculty who are working on large center-level proposals, as well as your single investigator proposals. So we are available for proposal development services on the entire spectrum of small proposals up to large. And one of the services that we provide is consulting with you and helping you wrestle through some of the broader impacts of your proposal. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How do proposals incorporate broader impacts? What are some good strategies? We'll start with, if you have a minute here, take your phone and use our QR code, and you'll have our website at easy access. So we have a lot of resources on our grant writing website, including for broader impacts. We have updated that section, and so some tools, explanations that will be of benefit to you. So we'll take just a second while you access our website. Okay, so today, some of the things we're going to accomplish in our webinar. I want you to become more familiar with the agency expectations. What do they mean by broader impacts, and where will this appear in your proposal? And we're also going to address some of the best practices for developing these broader impact plans, and show you some good examples of what this looks like. And then I'm going to weave into our time together the resources that are available to help you with this. So NSF is probably the agency that has been in the vanguard for developing broader impacts requirements and language. It's been a part of their review process for many years. And in their perspective on broader impacts, a publication that the agency puts out, they really highlight that they're looking for you to not only advance knowledge, but they want you to impact society. So every single proposal, whether it's user-centric, research, or it's very fundamental, basic research focused, every single research proposal needs to benefit society. It's not about research just for research's sake. Other agencies, however, they all have to varying degrees a place for you to incorporate, weave in broader impacts. And so just going through some of the agencies that you probably work with, NSF, there's 3 different sections right now where you're going to need to articulate your broader impacts. They have it's typically a 15-page narrative. There's a section that has its own heading for broader impacts. There's the summary page where they have a separate heading just for the broader impacts. And then within the narrative, there's a required section on prior NSF support, where there's even a subsection for how have your previous projects incorporated broader impacts. So NSF is kind of a gold standard in that area. NIH, you're going to need to bring broader impacts into your significant section in the research strategy. DoD, it's all about how does this fit advance the military mission. So you need to map it to what matters to the Department of Defense. So it's a very much a targeted broader impacts result. USDA, you have a rational significance section where you're going to address why this USDA research is going to be relevant to the public. NEH, they have specific requirements for describing the broad implications to the U.S. public. And USAID, they want demonstrable impact for specific communities. So it's not the broad public that you would find addressed more in an NEH, but it's very targeted to a particular stakeholder community. So all agencies have an expectation of impacts. One of the places where we start when we're thinking through how to incorporate broader impacts is the context of your entire gap analysis for your proposal. So if you've worked with our team before, you know we emphasize a lot developing these one-page concept papers, where if you look down here this is where the more general outline for this paper, you're going to start with your storyline, where you're going to talk about what's the problem, what's been done already to address the problem, the big however, what's the gap that still remains, and then how do you propose to address the gap. You'll list your goals, objectives, why your team, what's unique about your methodology, and then you're going to summarize the impact of your success. So walking through here, you have to start with a societal problem here, and be able to articulate a specific problem that you're solving. You never want to start a proposal with, this is what I am proposing to do. When you do that, you leave red flags on the table for why is this the exact right answer? Why isn't something else an option as a solution? So start with context. What problem is being solved? This section here of your concept paper, this is your one-page concept paper, is feasibility. Do you have the right methodology, and are you the right people to do the work? And then when you summarize the impact of your success, you're answering the big so what? Why does all of this matter? So this is a starting point for a lot of our work with faculty when we're wrestling through what type of broader impacts you need to articulate in your proposal. All right. So in the NSF proposal and policy guide, they talk about how broader impacts can come directly out of your research, but also can come out of your complementary ancillary activities, such as an education or outreach initiative, a diversity plan, something else that's not exactly the core of your research plan. And so you can think of it as three chords that together, it's the weaving together of them that will turn into a broader impacts statement or plan. So you have research, your direct research impacts, you have an education outreach initiatives, and then there are flavors of broadening participation that touch on both research and your education plan. So weaving them together, that is the best practice way to communicate a broader impacts plan. You can think of 10 different flavors or chords of these activities. And NSF has come up with this list, and it's very comprehensive. I can't think of anything that could be on here. Maybe we'll think of one eventually, but it's an extremely comprehensive list. From fuller participation of women, you have STEM education development, educator development, public literacy, just general, how are you improving life for the public? How are you developing a competitive STEM workforce for the U.S. and increasing partnerships across the different stakeholders? You're improving our national security, increasing our economic competitiveness, and the things that you are developing, you're delivering content that will inform public policy in a positive way, and perhaps you're even helping to build a research infrastructure that will add to the sustainability of the research enterprise. So these are 10 different chords. And so what we've done here is our grant writing group, we have accumulated some examples from proposals that we've worked on with Purdue faculty, where we've shown how these broader impact, these activities that can lead to broader impacts. Now we're showing you, are these coming out of the research enterprise? Are these directly coming out of a broadening participation? Are they reflecting education and outreach? So you can take a look at our examples and see how your broader impacts cut across the entire spectrum, and sometimes integrate several of these chords together, and sometimes they're a standalone chord. So here's an example related to broader impacts for fuller participation of women, minorities, and persons with disabilities in STEM. So in this example, there were a group of faculty who were submitting a large transportation center proposal, and they were also hosting the Purdue Road School, and they had some prominent women leaders in the transportation area who were keynote speakers for the Road School. So in collaboration with the Women in Engineering program, and this is something that, tuck this away, it's important to bring in expertise that's on campus. So they partner with Women in Engineering, and they developed a camp that would be offered in close proximity to the Purdue Road School. During that camp, the keynote speakers, diverse keynote speakers, would come over and participate in these hands-on on activities with the students. The graduate students from transportation were also involved in this. And then the women keynote speakers would also talk through their own career trajectory and relate how they became interested in transportation as a field. So they could introduce middle school girls to perhaps an unthought of career trajectory for them. So here's an example. It had elements of education and outreach, but it also had the broadening participation or diversity element too. So they brought those two chords together to focus on the broader impact of fuller participation. Here's another example from improved well-being of individuals. So this is strictly a research chord where they're developing this novel mass spectrometer, and it's impacting water safety, and being able to identify contaminants in the water supply. Say for it could be used for communities such as Flint, Michigan, and so the broader impact is just safer water supply for communities. It could be applied in Flint. It could be translated into communities across the U.S. So strictly a research chord for this one. Here's another example, to inform public policy. And this one will come out of research, and it will have an education and outreach component with it. So they're going to propose activities for workshops and symposium, and they will attract forest managers, policymakers, stakeholders on how to improve the ecosystem services and improve the management of tree and fungal diversity. So they have research outcomes that now they're going to disseminate into a community that is actively involved in producing policy for the Forest Service or USDA. Another example of development of a diverse and globally competitive workforce. And this is one chord only. It's the education and outreach chord. So there's an activity called the 3MT, the 3-minute thesis. It's a national competition. Graduate students will have 3 minutes to communicate their complex science for their thesis to a general audience. So it's a great exercise for professional development for your graduate students. So they learn to communicate science to the non-experts. So it's a benefit to your graduate students, but also you have an audience of non-experts. So they're hearing about some cutting-edge STEM research and the implications of that work, and they're learning about the science behind it. So it's a win-win in the translation of knowledge. So good for your grad students, good for the public, and you're perhaps in that audience, you're piquing the interest of students who may want to also go into some similar research areas. So I'm going to talk through now, where does this content show up in your proposal? And I'm showing an example here from Tom Hurdle's large NSF proposal, the GlassNet, where it's a collaboration of US networks with international networks. So this is his summary impact statement. We're going to go through it bit by bit. So he's describing how he's going to unlock the global community's ability to assemble high quality, spatially explicit land, water, ecosystem data. They're conducting analysis and integration, collaborating on a global level. So we're talking through the research broader impacts right now. With this comprehensive analysis, they're going to be able to achieve multiple sustainable development goals. This is from the United Nations. To address a community recognized grand challenge on a worldwide stage. So this is all impact of the research, and they'll deliver transferable best research practices across the global community. Now we're going to move into some education outreach, broadening participation impacts. So because they have this infrastructure of the cyber platform, many more students will be able to participate. You don't have to have high performance computing resources at your institution. You don't have to download anything. The cyber platform provides all that you need. So diverse students, researchers across the world are going to be able to access the data, the tools, the models that Tom Hurdle's team is developing in this proposal. So more students, more researchers can be involved, and because of the mentoring, learning modules, data tools, research experiences, they're developing the human capital, and they're stimulating intellectual interchange and convergence among colleagues, in particular in a Native American community. They're partnering with a professional society of geologists from Native American areas. So they have a particular broadening participation goal with that stakeholder group. Students and early career researchers, they're going to gain skills to lead knowledge generation for connecting human and natural systems. So all of these are areas that they have research implications, research broader impacts, the education diversity broader impacts. And so, just as an overall summary, they're going to demonstrate evidence-based training, educational initiative, and synthesizing policy briefs. They're going to engage a community, and they're going to attract new users. So demonstrating, engaging, and attracting. This is their overall story for broader impacts. And this was part of their summary page for the NSF proposal. Okay, so now that you've seen an example of summarizing your overall broader impacts, now let's get a little bit more practical. And we're going to talk about how do you integrate the education and research on your proposal? How do you make these plans? What are your strategies that you need to put into place? What's the process of developing these strategies? Because these are two very prominent chords that need to weave together to produce your overall broader impacts. So this slide shows a graphic from our website that you have access to. And each of these steps you click on each step, and there is additional information and detailed information to access about each of these steps in the process for integrating your education with your research. First step is you have to identify a gap in the education workforce development area with the communities that you're working with. And, what is going on in your institutional context. It has to fit with your interest and your track record. And we'll go over the detail on all of these here in our webinar. You're going to determine what audience you need to focus on, who do you need to work with, how are you going to assess it, and then how are you going to write it up. So here's 7 things to really think through as you begin to work through what would be the initiatives that need to be in place in order to produce the type of broader impacts that you want on a proposal. What is your education gap? What are you passionate about? Where do you have a track record to build on? So you don't want to be doing initiatives in spaces where you have no interest. If you're not really excited about working with third graders, don't make early elementary education one of your vehicles for your education plan. You don't have to have a track record. At some point, you do things for the first time. But you also want to begin to build some trajectories where you're actually working on previous initiatives and showing that you're building expertise and familiarity in these areas. Don't reinvent the wheel. If resources and infrastructure exist at Purdue or even outside Purdue, leverage those. You don't have time or expertise to recreate all the programs that you want to be integrating into your proposal. You need solid things done well. Every faculty member, it's part of your job to create new courses. So that needs to be done very well. Maybe you'll add an element to it that's a little bit different, perhaps cross-listing interdisciplinary proposal. Take a class, maybe something that normally has just been offered in pharmacy. Now you're cross-listing it with pharmacy and biology or pharmacy and data science. But you also need to show leadership and innovation in the education and outreach components. So you have to move outside of what is typically done on campus and think of something that's a little bit innovative in this space. It needs to last beyond your funding period. When your 4-year project is done with, your education outreach plan should not come to a screeching halt. And it should be based on best practices. If you're doing hands-on projects with students, you need to show in the literature why this is a best practice option. So this means doing a little bit of literature review, working with experts in this area to be able to demonstrate that it's built on a best practice. So let's just pause for a minute and you guys spend some time thinking through these 7 issues and perhaps writing down some ideas. And then I'm going to walk through an example so you'll know how to take this type of information and turn it into an actual potential activity. All right, so here's an example project. It's a made-up project on the ecological consequences of biofuels, but based on some similar proposals that we've worked on. So there are 3 elements that you want to come together and bring together, and you're looking for this sweet spot here where the education gap and your leveraged resources on campus or off campus, and then your interest in your track record, they all come together, and you're looking for activities that fit all of them. Here's an example. So your education gap is you have grad students, you've noticed, it's not just anecdotal, but you have seen a trend where your graduate students, they learn the microethics, they know how not to plagiarize, they've done the responsible conduct for research, online training, but what they don't understand is the larger macroethics, the contextual ethics of their research when it's implemented in society. So you have a macro ethics gap that you've identified in your graduate students that's parallel to what you see happening across the U.S. How do you know it's a gap? It's not just your personal opinion, but the National Academies has developed a publication where they are discussing this as a gap. So you're pointing to thought leaders in the field who are also verifying, yeah, we see what you see. This is definitely a gap in this educational space. So for your interest in track record, perhaps you've brought in guest speakers who from policy backgrounds into your undergraduate engineering course just to talk about what are societal implications and the economic benefits or what kind of analysis needs to happen economically in this research space. So you're starting to develop collaborations across disciplines with some policy colleagues, and then you've also have served as a faculty panelist for this ethics colloquium. So you're beginning to develop some working relationships and some expertise across the disciplinary areas, and you have both the collaborations and you have a track record to build on and interest. You know this is space where you enjoy working. So now you're going to look at your leverage resources. So in this case, maybe you're going to work with the Purdue Policy Research Institute on campus. So now we've identified an education gap. We've looked at what your interest and track record has been in this space educationally. And now it's time to look at leveraged resources. So, there's this Purdue Policy Research Institute in Discovery Park that you're familiar with. And let's just pretend like there's this Purdue Policy Lab for undergraduates, and they have an honors class on policy alternatives for grand challenges. So you're going to work with the Policy Research Institute to develop a case study that they can implement in this honors class, and you're going to bring your grad students along as part of their professional development. Again, you're training them to be able to communicate complex science to non-experts. So you always want to weave in your graduate students into, it's a bonus when you can weave them into your initiative. So you're leveraging the Purdue Policy Research Institute. And then your grad students are also going to have an opportunity to work with Policy Institute and to develop policy briefs that could be disseminated through the Institute. So you've leveraged the Purdue Policy Research Institute. Maybe you want to take another step further, and you're aware of the Discovery Park undergraduate research internship program, the DURI program, where Purdue provides a stipend for students who are recruited across campus to work on interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary projects with Purdue faculty. So the DURI program, they do the recruiting, they review the students, they select them, and they put the students in this best practice cohort experience where they are doing more than working in your lab. They're also learning about how to write research abstracts and receiving additional professional development within that context. So you're not developing all this infrastructure, you're leveraging what Purdue already has. And it's a best practice because it is this cohort experience. They know how to recruit appropriately. They have an assessment plan and process that they will implement themselves. You're not recreating that. And they also have this fabulous research poster competition. So they get an opportunity to present their work in front of other faculty and industry collaborators. And they can even write up their research with some teammates and submit it to the undergraduate research journal. So all these things are a best practice experience for your undergraduates, all leveraged out of the Dury program. And so you would reference, how this is a best practice initiative. Maybe you're going to, again, extend it a little bit more with your leverage resources. You have something for the grad students with the Purdue Policy Research Institute. You have grad students and undergraduates involved there. You have undergraduates involved with the Dury. But maybe the scope of your project is larger and you have more resources available. So now you want to pull it into the high school, the K-12 arena. So you're going to leverage the Polytechnic High School that Purdue has close relationships with. And you're bringing in this broadening participation angle with it because it has a high percentage of underrepresented students in the school. So the likelihood of you being able to recruit diverse participants or being able to impact diverse participants is greater just because of the demographics of the school. So you have a potentially diverse group of students and teachers that you can partner with through the Polytechnic High School. So you're going to offer a research experience for teachers. Maybe you have heard of something called an RET, Research Experience for Teachers, where they come and work in your labs alongside your grad students, again, giving your grad students some professional development with communicating, mentoring. And one of the deliverables for these high school students will be a policy module that incorporates elements of the science, but also shows how it impacts policy in, say, water quality or water supply. And maybe they can infuse it into their chemistry class or physics class or whatever course that they're teaching. And you're going to point to it. This is a best practice because research shows that this interdisciplinary approach, it increases students' interest in STEM fields. And that active inquiry-based experiences that students learn really well from those. So you're going to point to where in the literature that this idea that you have is going to be a best practice. So based on that example where you've come up with your education gap and you have identified leverage resources, you've thought through your interest and track record and come up with some activities that leverage expertise and resources on campus, and they're based on best practices. So now let's step back and think through what are the broader impacts you can say you're delivering through those example activities. You have a life cycle analysis that's going to inform biofuel standards. So that will impact the well-being of the country, the policy making. You have, it's a direct benefit from your research. Your next generation engineering and agricultural workforce, you're being trained for stakeholder engagement. They're learning how to talk across disciplines and how to engage with policymakers, people outside of the research area. They're talking with teachers. So you have a workforce development that's happening here. You're increasing the STEM pipeline. You have a greater diversity of undergraduates, high school students, and who are now interested in this type of research, who can see more clearly what's the integration of research with policy. And so they're better prepared to think about what will they do with such information as informed citizens, or maybe this is a career path for them too. And you're providing policy tools now for stakeholders in the local, state, federal government. So these are four of your broader impacts that then you would take and you would weave into statements within your project narrative and also in your project summary. Okay, so now in this slide, we're going to dive a little deeper into how do you move from your identified gap into choosing the type of audience that you need to focus on for your proposal. You don't need to do all of the options that are available to you. It really depends on the scoping of your proposal. If you're a large center level proposal, there will be an expectation that you have resources and a mission to really impact across K-12, undergraduate, graduate, postdoc. Most of you will be focusing on single investigator or small team proposals, so you want to be more targeted than that. In this example, let's say in your disciplinary area, there's just a lot of growth in the size of the data, the complexity of the data that's coming out of the research labs, but you've noticed a gap is that your students aren't as well prepared as they need to be as far as what to do with that data. So we're lacking some data science skills in your graduates. So there are several options here. Let's talk about 3 different options you can think of. And again, you choose based on what's your interest, what's your track record, what resources you can leverage, and really what makes sense for the agency and the particular gap that you've identified. So you can do things with high school. You can do things in broadening participation flavored. You can do things more in graduate, undergraduate arena here. So as an example, focusing on grad students and undergraduates, you would weave them together, put the undergraduate students in a data mine learning community experience. They're mentored by your graduate students, and your graduate students are also being prepared with a new data and analytics seminar. If you wanted to offer some initiatives and focus more on a broadening participation in this data science gap, maybe you would work with Computer Science Women's Network, and you'd put a panel together, and you'd have a seminar speaker where you'd bring in speakers, female speakers who are really highly qualified to talk about data science and computer science. So you'd contribute in this space. If you want to contribute in the K-12 arena, again, you could bring teachers in for a research experience for teachers. One of their deliverables would be a data science learning module. And then those teachers would collect data, have an experience in their classroom where they would collect data, upload it, and then practice analyzing, giving their students some experience through that learning module to actually analyzing the data. So 3 different audiences, and it will be up to you and up to your strategizing for what works best for your interests, for your expertise, for your what resources, how much money you have available. In all of these activities and all of these broader impacts, the education plan here, you're going to need to assess, how do you know this worked? Did they really learn from that data science module? What experiences were worthwhile for them with their undergraduate research experience they had, perhaps in the Dury area? And some of the assessment you will need to do by yourself or with some guidance. But one of the benefits of leveraging resources that are available on campus or even through an external evaluator is a lot of these programs come with some already proven assessment resources. If your students are involved in Dury, the Dury program is doing assessment, and you can leverage that and point to it. But whether you're in charge of the assessment or you're leveraging initiatives and resources and programs across campus where assessment is embedded in that, you do need to talk about this in your proposal. So we talked through the sweet spot of identifying your educational gap, what are your areas of interest and expertise, and then what are resources to leverage, because that's super important for both for the sustainability element of your educational initiatives, and also because likely you will not comprehensively have all the expertise to do the type of education outreach initiatives that will be required on these proposals. So gap, leverage resources, your interest, track record. And we've talked too about possible audiences that are available and being strategic and deciding what audience you want to focus on in your proposal. And now you need to be aware of how you're going to be evaluated on this education outreach plan. And its potential to weave in with the research and produce broader impact. So these are some very typical criteria that, depending on the agency, to different degrees, are going to be held up as the rubric for your broader impacts. Do you have a potential to benefit society and advance societal outcomes? Are you being creative, original? Are your ideas potentially transformative? Is it well-reasoned, well-organized, based on sound rationale? Remember how we talked about how do you know that's a best practice? And can you point to in the literature how you know that hands-on project activity is the best learning mechanism in that place? Do you have a way to assess whether or not you were successful in these initiatives? How well qualified are you and your team or your organization? Again, points to you will not comprehensively have all of the expertise to do this. So you need to be aware of who are the experts on campus, what programs are available that have infrastructure and expertise and experience that you can bring on, leverage, and point to their expertise to help answer this type of criteria. Are there adequate resources available to the PI through Purdue or collaborations to carry out the proposed activity? So in a related way, how will this actually be implemented? And this will really depend on the type of infrastructure and partnerships that you're leveraging. It could be in your department, at a college level, at an institution level. So all of these criteria you want to keep in mind. These are the high water marks that you're aiming for as you develop your plan and turn it into broader impacts. So one thing you'll want to keep in mind in all of this, the broadening participation is something that you can weave into your research, you can weave into your education and outreach. The example I gave here, working with the Polytechnic High School, you're never going to say in a proposal, I'm going to recruit 3 women into my lab, because you can't make a promise like that. What you can do is say, I'm going to recruit out of this group of students that has a high percentage of women. So your likelihood of broadening the participation will go up. So you're not quantifying and making promises that you can't keep, but you're doing your recruiting in very broad and equitable ways, so that your chances of broadening participation also increase. You can, in your research, for example, impact diversity. Is your team a diverse team? Is your leadership? Think of diversity not just in terms of underrepresented students, but it could be or faculty. It also includes elements of geography. Is it a rural community? Are they underserved in those ways? There's an executive order for diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility that has gone out and has greatly increased the awareness across all agencies. It used to be that NSF was the agency that focused on broadening participation more than all of the others, but now we're finding even in agencies such as Department of Energy, they all have a 3-page plan now for diversity, equity, and inclusion that you need to be prepared to address. So some of these requirements will be addressed through your education outreach plan. Some of it will be your team composition. Perhaps you'll have some ways to recruit early career faculty from more diverse groups. So this, as you remember, we have a 3-chord strand for broader impacts. Coming directly from your research, do you have a tool, a model that's going to, perhaps change the ability to identify when a water source has contaminants in it? That would be an impact directly from the research. So research and something from education and outreach, or something from broadening participation. Those 3 weave together and help you develop a plan overall for broader impacts for your proposal. So again, an example of the type of requirements that are now in place across all agencies to begin to think more purposefully for how to bring in a more diverse group of participants as researchers, as stakeholders into your proposal. So you'll find it in every agency, and we'll need to be prepared to incorporate this. So I'm just going to end with a reminder that there's help available for you for not just developing your education plan and thinking through your education gap, your interest track record, resources on campus. We're very much a matchmaker group. We can identify who can come in and provide some key resources for you. So you can click on that part of our website, and it'll describe some of the services that we provide, which includes broader impact. So we'll work with you to identify the type of activities that can be infused and then into your proposal, and then also help you articulate the language around what are the broader impacts that are coming out of those three chords of your research itself, the education outreach, and then also the broadening participation diversity elements that can be a part of your research and your education and outreach initiatives. So contact us, and we'd be glad to work with you further on this. Thank you.